Massive turnaround. Donald Trump critic Anthony Scaramucci is now sharing information in an interview about why the US will eventually buy Bitcoin. And he is very, very sure about this. What is special is that he comes from the Democratic camp and is now even influencing the mood here. He talks about how important it is to get majorities in the Senate and that more and more people from the Democratic camp are changing their minds. The statements here are particularly explosive because Scaramucci describes Donald Trump as a politician who is dividing the country and calls him irresponsible. So we have people from the Trump camp who now clearly believe that we have a strategic Bitcoin reserve here. And he also talks about the details of how this will happen, when it will happen, and what it will take. That it requires majorities in the Senate, and that it needs the right people in the banking committee, that it takes the right politicians in the right places, and that Donald Trump can't do it all by himself. He really needs the majorities. And this is a highly explosive clip that even shocked me, because I already knew that the Donald Trump team is strongly behind Bitcoin, but there has been a lot of resistance coming from the Democratic camp. And now it seems that even this resistance is starting to clear up. And people in the Democratic camp now seem to suddenly be warming up to Bitcoin. But take a look at it, and I'll give you my assessment afterwards.
Do you think we'll get a strategic Bitcoin reserve? You think? I do.
Actually,
what does that look like? Like, you've got the votes. Haggerty wants it. McCormick wants it. They have the votes in the Senate. Do you think? I think so. Yeah, there really is. I do think so. Yeah, for her bill to get 1 million Bitcoin, right? That was her full bill, right? This stuff gets negotiated, so you'll probably have 200 that won't get sold. They'll probably buy another 400,000 or 500,000 Bitcoin. What about the next? You don't think that's going to happen? Let me tell you why I think it will happen, okay? Trump wants it to happen. And he's got the Senate Banking Committee. Tim Scott wants it to happen. He's going to be the chair of the Senate Banking Committee. Vicente wants it to happen. If you're telling me there are no Democrats, I don't believe that because a lot of Democrats voted for the Saab 121 bill. If you looked at the distribution of votes, it was a bipartisan approval of that bill. And by the way, Ryan, if you were 40 or 50, say you were under the age of 60, you voted for the bill. If you were a Democrat, if you were an old school politician like Elizabeth Warren or Sherrod Brown, you voted against it. So if you're telling me there are no Democrats who are going to vote for that, then I'll say, okay, then we're not going to get it. But I don't see that. I think Rakana would vote for it. I think there are a lot of Democrats who look at it and say, if Bitcoin is digital gold and we have $600 billion of gold on reserve at our bank, in the Federal Reserve Bank, you're telling me we couldn't put 75 to...
And this is, if you ask me, a very, very revealing clip here. Really hot topics are being discussed, and he clearly states that, yes, the Bitcoin reserve will come. The commentator is shocked because Scaramucci demonstrates why the Bitcoin reserve is coming. He states that without Democratic support, he would be cautious, as implementing a Bitcoin strategy is a big intervention. It won't work if only Republicans support it. Broad support is needed. Scaramucci mentions buying 400 to 500 Bitcoin over a longer period, not all at once. And it won't work if only the Republicans, the party of Donald Trump, are in favor of the Bitcoin reserve. You need broad support. He says now that they will buy 400 to 500 Bitcoin, but he mentions it will be over a longer period, so they probably won't buy it all at once. He also says that it will basically become a betting market, so they pitched 1 million here, and then it will go back and forth. Then maybe some Democrats will say, yeah, 1 million is too much, blah, blah, blah. And that's why he thinks they'll meet somewhere in the middle at 400 to 500 Bitcoin, but that would already be massive. The question is, over what period of time will this happen? In my opinion, Bitcoin would almost be too little here, because as I have said before, if we don't play the game aggressively enough, then other countries will simply overrun the USA. But now something very, very important is happening, and he clearly states all the Democrats who are in favor of Bitcoin, like Rokana and whatever. He also mentions that the banking committee, which is very, very crucial, has key players who support Bitcoin. There was also the SEP regulation that banks can't hold Bitcoin and so on. And the Democrats have strongly opposed that and have pushed for Bitcoin not to be held on bank balance sheets, or let's say only held with a full reserve. Let's say it can only be held with a full reserve. So if you have 1 Bitcoin, you have to hold the equivalent here in US dollars, roughly in US dollars, which of course makes it completely unprofitable And he also clearly states that there were very strong opponents of Bitcoin who pushed for bad regulations preventing banks from holding Bitcoin. He says, yes, that's definitely true, but most of the opponents were really older people like Elizabeth Warren and all those clowns who stood against Bitcoin. And now he simply says that the younger folks in the Democratic camp are opening up to Bitcoin and that they are receptive to it. And that's a very, very important message we can take away, because I believe most people weren't aware that there is also support within the Democratic camp. And it seems like more and more people are starting to embrace Bitcoin. Maybe more and more people are realizing, hey, Bitcoin is here to stay. We can't just ban it. And what's interesting is that this whole thing, as already mentioned, really comes from a Trump opponent. That is Scaramucci, who has been shooting against Trump since 2017. He was once part of the Trump camp. Then he had a falling out with Trump. And since then, he's been going hard against. Yusen has also expressed support for Harris during the campaign, and now we're even hearing voices saying that the strategic Bitcoin reserve will definitely go through. For me, that's a sign that it's becoming more likely that this will happen. It's also important to note that this is just one voice. Just because Scaramucci says something, it doesn't mean 100% that it will actually happen. We really need to consider different voices here. We now have, e.g., the voice of Dennis Porter, Scaramucci, and critical voices saying, I'm not so sure if it's going to happen. But we also have critical voices saying, hey, I'm not so sure if it's going to happen. But here, Scaramucci is definitely very, very close to politics. There are many people who are more distant from politics, who just make random assessments, create a YouTube video saying, hey, the Bitcoin reserve is going to happen. But it now looks like more and more people, not just in the Democratic camp, are in favor of the Bitcoin reserve, but also more and more people, let's say, who have hope and the belief that the Bitcoin reserve is really coming, including Bitcoin opponents. And this is new information for me that I haven't had in this form before. He also clearly states, hey, if we have gold reserves, and I don't remember the exact numbers he mentioned, but we have such large gold reserves, why can't we take a part of that and, let's say, build a Bitcoin reserve? He hasn't called for selling the gold reserves to buy Bitcoin like Cynthia Loomis did. But I mean, that's an absolutely legitimate argument. I mean, Bitcoin is definitely, at least in my assessment of its properties, clearly superior to gold. And why should we bet on horses when we can bet on space rockets? So here we have the new superior technology that we have in the form of Bitcoin. And it's really, really important to highlight what he said about the Senate, that you can't just push decisions through. Of course, there's also the executive order being prepared here. I believe that with an executive order, you could simply vote over the Senate, the banking committee, and so on. But I mean, it's still not great to just vote over other people's heads. I actually asked ChatGPT for an assessment of how important the banking committee and, let's say, the Senate are, and also have voices from the opposing side. This means a decision about the use of public funds. Buying Bitcoin for strategic reserves would be a political and financial decision. For that, legislative approval in Congress is needed, and often a majority in the Senate. Senators who sit on important committees like the Banking Committee have significant influence over whether such measures are supported. So here, it's clearly confirmed again that approval is needed in Congress and the Senate at various levels, because this is a significant change. If you just make trivial decisions, then it's not really relevant. That's why many people say there won't be a sale of gold, because to push through the sale of gold and buy Bitcoin with it, you need even more approval. This means that the more drastic the decision, the more support you need in the political arena, even from the opponents and so on. And the less significant the intervention is, the less political support you need as well. Political majorities in Congress make steps difficult without broad support, especially if controversial. Clear Senate majorities are needed to legitimize purchases. Political factions may split over Bitcoin as a risky asset or long-term hedge. A clear majority is essential. Decisions can't be arbitrary, or factions may split. Political factions could split depending on whether Bitcoin is seen as a useful but also risky asset or a long-term hedge. So here, it's clearly confirmed again that we really need a clear majority, and decisions can't just be made arbitrarily over people's heads, because otherwise it could lead to problems where all the political factions split. I mean, that's already happening anyway, but I would say it's very, very important to take this into account. Then there's also the point about the Federal Reserve, because Jerome Powell said that right now there's no legal framework that allows the Fed to buy Bitcoin in any way. Then Cynthia Loomis says, no, that's not a problem at all, because if we push this through, the legal framework will simply be changed, and then the Fed will also be allowed to hold Bitcoin. This means that collaboration with the Federal Reserve, the central bank in the US, and other institutions is necessary. The Federal Reserve must be included in such considerations. Here, the assessment is very clear. You have to involve the Fed. You can't just do this on your own, as they control the monetary policy of the US. Senators who have influence over the Fed could ensure that Bitcoin is considered in the reserve deliberations. The Banking Committee would serve as a mediator between the government and the Federal Reserve. So here you can see again how the Federal Reserve, the Banking Committee, and the senators are interconnected. This means that the senators influence the Federal Reserve, and the Banking Committee is basically the centerpiece that mediates between the two. So we definitely need Bitcoin supporters in the Banking Committee, and we need Bitcoin supporters in the Senate team. We also need Bitcoin supporters in the Fed, but we don't have them at the moment. So we need the influence of the Banking Committee and also from the senators who are positively advocating for Bitcoin. Here, maybe some banks, senators, whatever, here are some orange pills. So in my opinion, this is a very, very important video. Feel free to let me know how you currently assess the situation, so to speak. In my opinion, at the moment, I would say it doesn't look 100% like that. I'm not as convinced as Scaramucci that the reserve will happen, but I'd say the probability is probably around 50%. The question is, in what form will it come? Whether it comes in an aggressive, positive form or a weakened form. If you want to buy Bitcoin now, I'll put a link below for you to do that. The question is, in what form will it come? Whether it comes in an aggressive, positive form or a weakened form. If you want to buy Bitcoin now, I'll put a link below for you to do that. The easiest way to buy Bitcoin in Europe, super easy, super simple, absolutely recommended. Here, with the code Bitcoin Hotel, you can also get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. And now, here's a great recommendation. If you don't want to leave your Bitcoin on an exchange, but really want to manage it yourself to truly be the boss of your own money, then I'll also put a link below for a TREZOR hardware wallet. Really super easy if you are a beginner, a professional, 2001 open source tool, absolutely bulletproof. If you keep your Bitcoin on a hardware wallet, you're no longer tied to exchanges or any third-party ETFs or anything like that. That's why here you can get discounts with the code Bitcoin Hotel when purchasing such a hardware wallet. And now let me know how you see things. Until then, peace out.